Don Capria, and I'm the author of Colombo, the Unsolved Murder, and I am chatting with Stacks.
And I'm with a major organized crime bust. 23 people under arrest now accused of stealing guns and cash.
Today, police revealed 4 organized crime groups are wreaking havoc.
From aggravated robbery to kidnapping, burglary, and more. Let's take a look at this. New pictures from court documents in this case. These are a few of the people who have been charged, and investigators say the money, tens of thousands of dollars, is all stolen.
FBI, open up! Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Stacks. I'm your host, Bill Stacks, and today I got Don Capria. What's up, Don?
How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing great. Thank you for coming on my show. I appreciate it.
For sure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, you have a really interesting book. You got an interesting background. I saw your social medias, and it intrigued me to want to know more. So
ask away.
Yeah. So where were you born and raised?
White Plains, New York, where I currently reside. So I'm a suburban kid. Lived like 30 minutes outside the city my whole life, and it was kind of the best of both worlds. You know, we had the relaxation of the burbs, and then if you wanted to be a little bit of a devil, you can make your way into the city and do that, which I think I did a lot as a kid.
Yeah. Oh, I'm from Bristol, Connecticut, so I used to go to the city too.
Yeah. I played Bristol. My earlier days was like a skateboard kid, and my first venture into the art world was into graffiti art. So I would start taking the train to the city to do graffiti pieces and tunnels and stuff, and then was in the New York hardcore scene. So I played drums in a band and toured a lot, but definitely played a lot of shows throughout the Northeast. And I think it was the Bristol Teen Center that I played.
Bristol Teen Center?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a Bristol Teen Center. Yeah.
Was it CT Bike Shop?
No, I don't think it was a bike shop. I feel like it could have been a teen center, but I know for sure I've been to Bristol before.
Yeah. So when did you get into organized crime and the whole aspect of it, the genre of it, as they would say? What lured you into it?
From the outside, you know, I've always liked reading the paper and reading these stories. And I think that coming from New York, I was an Italian American. I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of Italian Americans. The stuff you're reading in the paper was not too far away from what you could see in the street. So, you know, when you had a neighbor that got arrested and all that kind of stuff, it just piqued my interest even more and more. So then I went from reading papers to reading books. I became an aficionado. I started reading every book I can get my hands on, mainly on New York organized crime. And I found for me that I liked going back. Well, I grew up in the Gotti era, and it was all over, highly publicized about, you know, John Gotti. But then I noticed, well, he's in the Gambino crime family. So what is that? And I started tracing things back to the origin of the Five Families and gangsters like Lucky Luciano and, you know, Frankie Yale. And the more I started getting back into the older stuff, I felt like that was more my speed. And then I became kind of the guy that everyone would ask questions to. So that was really the start of it, was just my interest in exploring the subject.
And when was the first time you reached out to one of these organized crime members?
I think it was in and around 2003, somewhere around that time. I had met guys, people that were not involved in the rackets per se, but people that are around, you know, knock around guys. Yeah. And I had been around those kind of guys my whole life, but I think I really didn't get into wanting to tell a story about this stuff. I had shot a TV pilot about young Italian American kids in Westchester, where I grew up, and it was a scripted series, so it was loosely based on my life, and it had a little bit of a mob element to it. And this is the time at the height of The Sopranos. So I think it was around that time someone reached out to me and said, you know, we see you're a writer, Italian American, and we have this story that we're working on, and we wanted to know if you wanted to take a look at it. And that was the agent for Anthony Colombo. So they had started on the Colombo project with a different writer. And I think he was from the West Coast, and there potentially wasn't a great chemistry there between him and Anthony. So the agent, it was the person that was kind of putting the whole project together, this guy named Ray. I got a phone call at like 11 o'clock at night. I'm in a studio. I'm working on ADR for this TV show. And this friend of mine said, listen, this guy's going to call you, and they're interested in a writer for the Colombo book. You know, he's going to call from a private number. Take the call. So I take the call, and a real serious sounding guy on the other line says, listen, I did a little bit of research on you. I like what you're doing. We wanted to know if you wanted to do something bigger. And I was like, yeah, so talk to me. So he says, well, I've got the Colombo book and we're looking for a writer. Would you like to meet Anthony Colombo? I said, of course I would. So he goes, all right, 10 o'clock Sunday, drive up to this diner. So I drove up to this diner in upstate New York, sat down at a round table, OG diner on the side of the highway kind of thing. And it was Ray, it was Anthony Colombo. It was Anthony Colombo Jr., who was about my age, a lawyer from the West Coast, and Anthony's driver. And we all sat down and they asked me, what did I know about Joe Colombo? And, why would I be a person that could write this book? And I think I got Anthony interested because how much stuff I knew besides the John Q. Public stories, because in all the books I have on my shelf, it's like the same 5 paragraphs, just reorganized with different adverbs and verbs and colored differently. And no one really dug deeper. I mean, this is a guy that, was shot in front of 20,000 people in Columbus Circle. It's an unsolved murder. And no one really dug into that. It was like, oh, well, it had to do with Joe Gallo or Carl Gambino, but one of those 2 things happened and that's it. It's a wrap. And I just never believed that. So when I mentioned things like COINTELPRO, the FBI counterintelligence program and stuff to Anthony, he started to see that I was a person that was going to dig enough to give a good story.
Yeah. And what was your first impression when you met Anthony?
Man, it was really love at first sight. I mean, he was a gentleman and he presented himself that way. And at every step from the time I met Anthony until the last time I met with him, it was the same human. And that's rare. It's very rare. It's also very rare to have someone give such rope on the collaborative process when they're the co-author with you. He trusted me a lot and from the get-go. And I the same with him. It was an immediate, I felt like he was an uncle, and I just felt like he was someone I could trust, and I'm glad that he felt the same. He was a family man. He was very respectful. I think one of the first things he said to me during an interview was, Don, he had a very low, gravelly voice, and he said, people are going to tell you that I'm a dinosaur. They're going to say this guy is old. And when they do, I want you to thank them for saying that about me, because I am. And he was very proud of his roots, that he grew up at a time, it was the salad days of organized crime. This guy grew up going to the Copa. His father was the suspected capo of one of the 5 families, and at that time that meant something. That was a prestigious position to be in, even if you didn't know it was for sure, because as a kid he didn't really know it was for sure. But everything that he had, everything that he was rooted in was really core Italian roots that I was definitely I respected, and I aspire to be that way that he was with his family.
Yeah, he was about his family a lot, right? That was the main focus of his life.
Yeah. Even the book, as much as he wanted to get a lot of the biography side of his father out, the book really lends to a father-son story. And it's a lot about, how he grew up alongside of his father and how that relationship is. So everything with him was family at the core. So
what year did Joe Colombo pass away? Because he was shot in Columbus Circle, right?
Yes. Yeah. So he was shot Columbus Circle in 1971, and then it was about 7 years that he lingered in a coma. But some would say even not totally a coma. There were times where he was, I think, actively breathing and doing things without the machinery. There were several surgeries, but that was about 7 years before he passed away after a surgery. And by that point, he had moved and was living in upstate New York, up by like Washingtonville.
And how old was Anthony when that happened?
I'd say he was in his early 30s, because I believe he was about 24 or 25 years old when his father was shot. So that would have put him about 31, 32 years old when his father died. And
he got involved with the life.
Right.
Did he get involved with the life when his father was alive, or did he?
No, absolutely not. He, he told me, he was like, look, I want to tell this story from the time I was born and the time that my father was shot. And I want you to research my father's youth and my family lineage with me, and we'll get to my father's biography. He goes, but I didn't know my father as a gangster until after my father was shot. He goes, you know, he didn't come home and put the gun on the kitchen table and, you know, I came home from work today. And, you know, it wasn't like that. He went to work every day at Cantaloupe Realty. You know, he had his hands in other businesses. And while in his family, for instance, one of the closest people that he considered, it was his uncle, Carl, was Carl Gambino. So Anthony did see the newspapers and some of the people that his father was around. And he did question that at times. And he did bring it to, he was afraid of his father, but he also did question it. And his father would shoot him down. He's like, look, if they arrest me, it's not going to be real and it's not going to stick. He goes, they don't like me. They don't like a lot of my friends. They don't like Italian Americans. So he did a very good job of proving to his son that he was not involved in organized crime. And he also was preparing Anthony for a life in outside of organized crime and politics. He was always breeding Anthony to work towards politics and be a public servant. He started with Valley Forge Military Academy. And then when the Italian American Civil Rights League launched, at that moment, he knew that this was a great stepping stone for Anthony to get involved in the civil rights movement and be around politicians and be around public speaking and all of these things. So his aspirations for him were completely away from organized crime. And then when he passed away, Anthony was around a lot of his father's close friends that were gangsters who let him know the reality of what was happening with him. And yes, he eventually got involved in the rackets. And I think one of the things that I was reading a lot of when I was writing the book was The Godfather and the history behind The Godfather, like the Godfather Papers and whatnot. It was interesting, the art imitating life and then vice versa, because this is the Michael Corleone story. But, you know, Puzo wrote it and then it happened. You know, Anthony standing in Roosevelt Hospital, you know, wondering if they're going to come kill him as his father's in the other room, just like Michael Corleone standing in the hospital wondering if they're going to come. That was all happening around the same time that they're filming the movie. So it was very meta what was going on with Anthony Colombo and his father.
So he was worried that people were going to come after him after his father was shot.
Yeah, he was. The FBI had come to him, I think maybe on the second day that they were in the hospital, and told them that they had received credible sources were telling them that they were going to make an attempt on both Anthony and Joseph Jr. And potentially, you know, the sister or the mother. And they wanted to keep around the clock protection on Anthony and the family. And Anthony, you know, rebuked. He was like, the same protection you offered my father. He goes, this guy was in a press circle, you know, with the most police presence in the history of New York City, and you guys couldn't help him. So do me a favor and get the fuck out of my face is basically what he told them. And that from there, I think, is where Anthony first started to see that the street would protect him more than the police force could.
So when I was doing my research, I came across your videos. You recorded those videos with Anthony, right?
I interviewed him. They were recorded by a very good friend of mine, Esteban Oriol, who's a photographer, documentarian, filmmaker. So we were out, and he did most of the photos that you see of Anthony in later in life, the professional photos. So we filmed those, and I kind of sat in just doing the interview process, the sit down tapes.
Yeah, they're really good. They're
Yeah.
short though. They're short.
They're little vignettes. You know, it was unfortunately, you know, I had faith that Anthony was going to live a lot longer than he did, just because of the whole process. We took 3.5 years to write the book, and Anthony was fine for the 3.5 years. And I probably took that for granted, that potentially something couldn't happen to him. So with that, he ended up, while we were touring for the book, he ended up having some ailments. And then from that point on, there was never an opportunity for me to get him back on video, because I would have loved to have done some more video work with him, long form and further.
Yeah, it's really sad that you weren't able to continue and broaden the story more, you know? So
yeah.
Did he tell you about how he really dived into the organized crime? Did he open up to you about that?